to Tuesday Tips for Leaders of Volunteers, and I am your hostess with the mostest, Dana Litwin. And today we're talking about change management. And this is related to some other Tuesday tips and interviews I've done with expert leaders of volunteers around managing up, but this is specific to when you are redesigning or updating or having some pretty major changes to your volunteer programs or community engagement programs. And these are rules that would apply in the corporate world, in the nonprofit world, in the government world. They're just really good change management ideas to keep in mind. So the first one is, has there been a breach of trust? What's the culture of the agency? Now, culture always beats out strategy. You can have the best plans on paper to make changes or updates and do some positive shifts in how your programs work. But if there isn't a culture of trust to go along with those changes, then it's really going to be very, very difficult, if not close to impossible, to get those changes implemented and in motion. So if you have done recent surveys or kind of an emotional temperature check amongst the major stakeholders or the people or the teams that are going to be most impacted by the changes, and they don't trust or understand the process, then that's where you need to start, is lay that foundation of trust for the people making the changes and for the process. And that's not easy to do. One of the first things you need to do to repair trust and get buy-in is make sure that it's very intentional and consistent in the positive changes that are happening, that there's collaboration, very clear communication, and accountability, kind of not letting anything slide. So if there's been a culture of people can kind of get away with not turning up for shifts or something like that has been happening, that stuff needs to be course corrected to kind of rebuild trust in the system before any other big changes are happening. Now, the next thing to do in change management is really identify who's already on board, who are your allies and your advocates for these positive changes or updates to your programs, and how can they kind of amplify the message and spread the message, and are those people trusted by other members of their team? So creating and strengthening that trust connection through some kind of key stakeholders or people who are going to be in the midst of changes or doing the changes or can be the best advocates for why these updates to the programs or the processes or community engagement or doing more diversity, equity, inclusion, whatever the updates include, you've got kind of some internal cheerleaders to help with the process and help get other people bought into the program updates. Now, if you identify that kind of circle of influence and identify those team members that can help, then the next step in that is, well, who's the tough sell? Who's the person who's going to be the most resistant, or a group of people or a department? Typically, it's someone who is it's either on this side of, I like things just the way they are and I don't need the status quo to change. That's one kind of group of people who are really resistant to change in any organization. And the other end is a group that just, again, doesn't trust the process or thinks that doesn't trust that these changes will make real difference. So that's a lot of words that aren't necessarily followed up by action. So to have a real positive impact that aligns with a positive intent, you have to make sure that actions follow words, kind of walk the walk and talk the talk at the same time. You also want to honor and call out and really celebrate the strengths of the current culture and the strengths of the team and the strengths of what is working in the program. If you're building something from the ground up and you're adding a volunteer program where one hasn't existed before, and I do that a lot as a consultant, I kind of build things from the ground up, or I do some major updates or changes and evaluations to programs that have existed for many, many decades. Either way, if there's a lot of new things going on, be really mindful of how that can weave into the existing culture and kind of accentuate some of the things that people like about how the program works right now, and be really clear that you're not trying to dismantle the good parts of a program or a mission or how you do community engagement. You're just trying to update to allow for more access for all, which is another recent topic I've talked about. And whether you're integrating formal or informal interventions, the kind of changes you're making or interventions as you promote kind of new behaviors or new ways of doing things, it's important to make people aware of how they as an individual and how their teams impact and affect and influence the companies or the organizations, whether it's corporate employee CSR or nonprofit or government work, how that strategic performance impacts these changes, and how people will have kind of a personal responsibility to take action or speak up when something isn't working. So whether it's a formal approach, like this is a very new process and this is how you do it, or informal, like new kinds of rules and metrics, incentives, adding to what are some cultural shifts, what are some social shifts or attitudinal shifts that might have to happen. Again, culture beats out strategy. What are kind of those emotional shifts that have to occur, or informal or social elements, before the changes can be put into place? And whether they are formal or informal, an intervention should do two things. It should reach people at that emotional level, invoking a sense of pride in their work, altruism, how they feel about the impact in the community of the work itself, and tap into kind of more analytical or rational self-interest, like, will people be finally promoted to leadership or recognized for what they've done? Or if they're paid employees working with volunteers, are they getting a title change, kind of recognizing that they're working more closely with volunteers? And that's not just something, it's never just something that the volunteer coordinator does by themselves. Everyone else who's working with volunteers, paid or unpaid, are deputized into that volunteer engagement work. Is there some sort of external recognition for those who come on board, kind of a gentle peer pressure? And we want to be careful not to make people feel othered or left out or left behind in a process, but there's always kind of a natural first adopter, second adopter, beta testing. These are terms that are often used in the tech industry, of kind of who's on board first and who follows after they see that something is working really, really well. Oh, thank you, Mr. Rattel-Hawk, for chiming in. And kind of my final or fifth tip around this is, once you have this process underway and the interventions and the goals and the milestones, we want to kind of measure and monitor this cultural evolution, and again, celebrate the goals, the milestones, and then be flexible enough and adaptable enough to make changes as needed when any piece or part or element of the new program or plan isn't quite working. You might have to adjust timing on something depending on some other steps leading up to it, or how people are reacting. And having that adaptability and that kind of flexibility also helps people understand that they're really doing, everyone is doing everything they can to create these positive changes, and they're willing to listen to feedback. It's not just my way or the highway, which again can be very off-putting to getting people on board. So I hope you've enjoyed these Tuesday tips on change management and a little bit of urban wildlife chiming in, and we'll see you next time with more Tuesday tips. And if you've got some expertise in Tuesday tips as a leader or volunteer to share yourself, I'd love to broadcast that on this channel. So send your ideas to me, and you'll see my email below, and you can always find me at danalitwinconsulting.com. See you next time.